This is the end of the course. You're almost to the goal line, but you made it this far. We made it to the 13th principle, and the 13th principle is chapter 14, and that's the sixth sense. Now, before we dive into this chapter, I want to say a few things. One, I'm going to stay 100% with Napoleon Hill on this chapter. And the reason why is this is a very advanced chapter. So we're going to get more in intermediate and advanced courses, more knowledge and more walkthrough on the sixth sense. Okay? And even Napoleon Hill says in this chapter, the only reason he stuck this chapter inside Think and Grow Rich, because he wanted to give people the complete outline to achieve success. And the sixth sense is in that outline, in the 13 steps on getting rich, or the 13 steps towards riches, or achieving any goal that you want. Because remember, when Napoleon Hill says riches, he doesn't necessarily mean all money. He still is talking about, in a very way in the beginning of the introduction, is wealth. See, what you have to do, you have to figure out, what does wealth mean to you? Because wealth is all pieces of the pie. It's not just riches, money, or financials. That's a piece of the pie, but it doesn't end there. Make sense? So even when Napoleon Hill says riches, he doesn't always talk about money. It doesn't always mean money. But this is what he says, and he says it right in the beginning of the chapter. And this is very unique. I mean, he says and explains that his dilemma on adding it to the book, because he wanted to give people all the steps, all the sources to achieve success in their life, but also he kind of turns around. It's almost like a double-edged sword or a catch-22. Then he says, in order for you to understand the philosophy in this chapter on the sixth sense, you must master all the first 12 principles to success. All the first 12 principles to receive riches, to receive your goals, to receive your wants and desires in your life. Wow. Now, also behind me, I left up the whole premise of the subconscious mind behind me, because we may or may not use it in the last couple chapters that we were covering. So I left this up as a review, just in case I come back and we do a little bit of review according to the sixth sense. But further ado, let's jump into and let's get started on the sixth sense. And I remind you again, you read this chapter before coming into this course, before doing this module right here. So you might be wondering, I don't know. Is Napoleon Hill crazy or what? Now, if you have those thoughts, hang on to them. It's only because you're a beginner that you don't understand everything. Just because you don't understand something doesn't make it not true or whatnot. Make sense? You're just not at that level of understanding yet. That's why Napoleon Hill says and states you must master the first 12 principles before you can even conceivably understand the full measure of your subconscious mind. Let's get started. Chapter 14, the sixth sense, the 13th step toward riches. And he says this right in the beginning. It's the door to the temple of wisdom. The sixth sense is the door to the temple of wisdom. The 13th principle is known as the sixth sense, through which infinite intelligence may and will communicate voluntarily without any effort from or demand by the individual. Listen to this one more time. It's deep. The 13th principle is known as the sixth sense, through which infinite intelligence may and will communicate voluntarily without any effort from or demand by the individual. Now, this is where Napoleon Hill states, this principle is apex. It's complicated. That's what he's saying of the philosophy. It can be assimilated, understood, and applied only, he emphasizes only, by first mastering the other 12 principles. So again, it's about mastery of the principles. He brings it up. Now he takes it even a step further and said, in order for you to deeply understand this principle, you must master the other 12 principles before you even can understand this principle and master this one. The sixth sense is that portion of the subconscious mind which has been referred to as creative imagination. Remember, here, the subconscious mind, it's the creative imagination that really stimulates the subconscious mind. Remember? It has also been referred to as the receiving set through which ideas, plans, and thoughts flash into the mind. The flashes are sometimes called hunches or inspirations. And I bet if you're old enough, and even if you're young, you probably experience this if you observe and really think, especially if you're older. We've had those situations where we just have a hunch or inspiration, or maybe a hunch not to do something, not to go somewhere. Maybe we're driving home at night, and we always take this back road, and you just get like a deep intuition or a gut feeling, a hunch not to go down that road. And hopefully you listen to that hunch. But we've all had those situations where that has happened. But where is that coming from? Why does it happen? So it has to be a greater source or a greater source of knowledge that's really communicating to us or through us, as far as Napoleon Hill is explaining. The sixth sense defies description. The sixth sense defies description. It cannot be described to a person who has not mastered the other principles of this philosophy. Listen to this. It cannot be described to a person who has not mastered the other 12 principles. Because such a person has no knowledge and no experience with which the sixth sense may be compared. Understanding the sixth sense comes only by meditation through mind development. Let me say this one more time. Understanding the sixth sense comes only by meditation through mind development from within. The sixth sense probably is the medium of contact between the finite mind of man and infinite intelligence. And for this reason, it is a mixture of both the mental and the spiritual. It is believed to be the point at which the mind of man or woman contacts the universal mind. Now, in religious standpoints, we can say universal mind, universal law, we can say God. All means the same thing. Now, we could debate on that topic, but that's exactly how Napoleon Hill is describing it. Let me read that sentence one more time. It is believed to be the point at which the mind of man or woman contacts the universal mind or contacts God. After you've mastered the principles described in this book, you will be prepared to accept as truth a statement which may otherwise be incredible to you, and namely, through the aid of the sixth sense, you will be warned of impeding dangers in time to avoid them, and be notified of opportunities in time to embrace them. There comes to your aid and to do your bidding with the development of the sixth sense, a guardian angel will open to you at all times the door to the temple of wisdom. Now, we can take this paragraph and what we can do with it, the example I gave you a few minutes ago, and we could take a very basic example. I want to give you a very basic example rather than an advanced example. See, very basic is we've all had those times in our life, here and there, they come and go, hunches, inspirations, intuition, a gut feeling. And sometimes, most of the time when we realize it, it's a gut feeling not to do something, not to go somewhere, not to turn down that dark road. And sometimes we don't know why, where is it coming from, but if we listen to it. And at other times, we really have the proof of it with these hunches and inspirations or gut feelings or intuition. There's been times where you may have not turned down that, you just had a hunch not to turn down that dark road. And you learned the next day that there's a huge flood down there. There's a huge accident, or a huge accident occurred right when you would have been driving down the road. See, we've had those moments when that has happened. And it's the same thing Napoleon Hill is talking about. Let's continue. Whether or not this is a statement of truth, you will never know except by following the instructions described in the pages of this book, or some similar method of this procedure. And Napoleon Hill says, step by step through the preceding chapters, you have been led to this last principle. You have mastered each of the preceding principles. You are now prepared to accept, without being skeptical, the studious claims made here. You have not, he says this, if you have not mastered the other principles, you must do so before you may determine definitely whether or not the claims made in this chapter are fact or fiction. See, when you're reading this and you're still skeptical, it just means you haven't mastered the other 12 principles. Make sense? And Napoleon Hill is instructing you, you have to master the other 12 principles even before you say the claims made in this chapter, if they're fact or fiction. Now, also, this can be applied to any other chapters. It's about mastery, self-mastery. It's about mastering all the 13 principles. So if you read something in any chapter and you're skeptical, you're still wanting to debate, well, I don't know, whatever. You haven't mastered it. Plain and simple. Let's move on. Napoleon Hill says, long before I had ever written a line of publication, so long before he's even started writing books, because he wrote several books, writing speeches, writing for magazines, because he owned a magazine at one time, or endeavored to deliver a speech in public. This is very in the beginning of his career. This is when he was doing all the research. I followed the habit of reshaping my own character by trying to imitate the 9 men whose lives and life works had been most impressive to me. These 9 men were Emerson, Paine, Edison, Darwin, Lincoln, Burbank, Napoleon, Ford, and Carnegie. Then he says this is where the chapter really kind of takes off and can be hard to understand. Every night, over a long period of years, I held an imaginary council meeting with this group, whom I called my invisible counselors. The procedure was this, and he explains it. Just before going to sleep at night, I would shut my eyes and see in my imagination this group of men seated with me around my council table. Here, I had not only an opportunity to sit among those whom I considered to be great, but I actually dominated the group by serving as the chairman. He continues, and I had a very definite purpose in indulging my imagination through these nightly meetings. My purpose was to rebuild my own character so it would represent a composite of the characters of my imaginary counselors. Realizing, as I did early in life, I had to overcome the handicap of birth in an environment of ignorance and superstition. I deliberately assigned myself the task of voluntarily rebirth through the method here described. And at this point, he really kind of describes his invisible counselors. This section is building character through autosuggestion. Now remember, going back to this self-conscious mind, now Napoleon Hill is really getting advanced here. He's using like an advanced topic, an advanced method to really subject the subconscious mind, to really stimulate the subconscious mind. He's really doing a creative imagination, but kind of like in our terms, or my terms, would be on steroids a little bit. He says, being an earnest student of psychology, I knew, of course, that all men and women have become what they are because of their dominating thoughts and desires. I knew that every deeply seated desire has the effect of causing one to seek outward expression, through which that desire may be transmuted into reality. I knew that self-suggestion is auto-suggestion, same word. Self-suggestion is what? Your affirmations, your repetitions. Okay, what you're saying to yourself over and over and over and over and over. See, we automatically do this. We automatically, so when I say affirmations, you're like, oh, Chad, this is hard. Oh my God, do you want me to do this? But you do it every day anyway. What are you thinking all day long, repeating yourself all day long? Most of the time it's negative stuff. It's stuff that you don't want, you don't like, and that's what you're telling yourself over and over and over. Let's continue. I knew that self-suggestion is a powerful factor in building character. That it is, in fact, the sole principle through which character is built. With this knowledge of the principles of mind operation, I was fairly well armed with the equipment needed in rebuilding my character. In these imaginary council meetings, I called on my cabinet members, which is his invisible counselors, for the knowledge I wished each to contribute, addressing myself to each member in audible words as follows. Now, I'm not going to read through everything. He goes through each person inside his invisible counselors, and he tells them what he likes about them, what their character, what their strong points are, and that's what he wants to learn from them. And this is a couple pages. He does this. Then he says, and he gives an example because he did this. I don't know how long. He did this before he realized. But at the end of all this, he gives you an example of everything he's doing. And at the end, he says this. He says this. These meetings became so realistic that I became fearful of their consequences, and I discontinued them for several months. The experiences were so uncanny, I was afraid if I continued them, I would lose sight of the fact that the meetings were purely experiences of my imagination. Some 6 months later, or after I had discontinued the practice, I was awakened one night, or I thought I was, when I saw Lincoln standing at my bedside. He said, "The world will soon need your services. It is about to undergo a period of chaos which will cause men and women to lose faith and become panic-stricken. Go ahead with your work and complete your philosophy. That is your mission in life. If you neglect it for any cause whatsoever, you will be reduced to a primal state and be compelled to retrace the cycles through which you have passed during thousands of years." Napoleon Hill says this right afterwards. He says, "I was unable to tell the following morning after he woke up whether I had dreamed this or had actually been awakened, and I have never since found out which it was. But I do know that the dream, if it were a dream, was so vivid in my mind the next day that I resumed my meetings the following night." And he gives examples of his meetings. And at that point, he was even adding more and more people to his invisible counselor meetings. And I believe he added so many, up to about 50 people that were involved. Then he goes on and he switches and he goes back to the brain. He says somewhere in the cell structure of the brain is located an organ which receives vibrations of thought, ordinarily called hunches. So we've kind of been talking about this. So far, science has not discovered where the organ of the sixth sense is located. Now let me pause here for a second and say, Now, today, science, as far as we talk about the sixth sense or the spiritual gland, right now they're calling it the pineal gland. Or rather, pineal gland, they're saying it's kind of a gland that's right between our eyes. They're nicknaming that the spiritual gland, which is a gland that Napoleon Hill is talking about. Now, if it's the spiritual gland, or really the spiritual gland, or where hunches even come from, I don't know. But as far as today, with science and research, that's what they're calling it. Napoleon Hill continues, but this is not important. So he's saying it's not important where it's coming from or figuring out, what sort of gland it is. He said the fact remains that human beings do receive accurate knowledge through sources other than the physical senses. See, the physical senses, remember, are the five senses up here in a conscious mind, which is see, hear, taste, smell, touch. See, remember, our subconscious mind never rests. It's always awake. Doesn't it seem weird? See, our conscious mind, our objective mind, or a thinking mind comes to a point of rest. And that's when we get sleepy, go into a sleepy state, take a nap, or we go to bed at night and sleep. So remember, we're explaining this. Once we get sleepy, see, repeating your goal and your desire statement morning and night, remember the significance of that is because you're bridging that gap between the conscious mind and thinking mind to the subconscious mind. So if our subconscious mind is never resting, it's always working morning and at night. I mean, sometimes, people have dreams that kind of tell them where things are. For example, that kind of seems far-fetched what I just said, but for example, have you ever lost anything? This is a simple thing. This happened to me too. You ever lost anything? Maybe you misplaced your wallet. Okay. This happened to me. This is actually an example that happened to me. I lost my wallet. I misplaced it. I eventually found it. But I misplaced it. I searched for 3 days trying to find my wallet, and everything's in my wallet. My credit cards, debit cards, license, everything. So I'm like, especially in LA, I'm scratching my head thinking, oh my God, I'm going to have to go and cancel everything, go to the DMV, get a new license, I was dreading it. But after 3 days, I was just thinking, I'm just going to start canceling. But something told me, don't cancel everything yet. And I listened to that hunch. And when I went to bed at night, I was kind of thinking to myself, well, where would it be? Where would it be? I'm trying to backtrack, all the places I checked. And when I went to sleep, and I kind of went to sleep in that state, when I woke up, I had this thought, this hunch. And the hunch was, and the thought was this. Earlier that week, I went to the post office to buy stamps and mail some packages. That's the only place I hadn't checked. So I thought, well, I need to go check it out. And once I walked in there, they recognized me, handed me my wallet. See, we all have those little instances that's happened to. So to really come back and discredit this chapter, I said, oh, I don't believe in that. I bet you, I can put money on it. If you really observe, and if you really think back, you have just basic examples of my example I gave you. Napoleon Hill continues and he says, these facts are mentioned preliminary to a statement of fact, which I shall now make, namely, that during my meetings with the invisible counselors, I find my mind most receptive to ideas, thoughts, and knowledge, which reach me through the sixth sense. I can truthfully say that I owe entirely to my invisible counselors full credit for such ideas, facts, or knowledge as I received through inspiration. On the next page, Napoleon Hill continues. He says, the chapter on sixth sense, this chapter, was included because the book is designed for the purpose of presenting a complete philosophy by which individuals may unwearyingly guide themselves to attaining whatever they ask in life. And this is the same thing I told you in the beginning of this module. The only reason he stuck this in here is he wanted to give you the whole picture, all the steps to set you up for success, no matter what that success is, no matter what you want to achieve. He wanted to give you everything. He continues, the finishing point is that brand of knowledge which leads to understanding. Understanding of self, understanding of others, understanding of the laws of nature, which are the laws of the universe, the laws of God. Recognition and understanding of happiness. Now, at this point, we're going to leave this chapter. We have one more chapter to go, chapter 15. I'm not going to dive any more into the sixth sense in this chapter. I wanted to give you exactly what Napoleon Hill gave you. But this is what I want you to do. Come back to this chapter and read it over and over and over again. Master the first 12 principles in this book. Read the book over and over and over. It's not enough just to read this book one time and say, oh, that was a great book. It's not enough to even do this course one time and you say, well, that was a great course. You gave me a lot of information. Thank you. Keep on applying it. Keep on watching. Keep on listening. And like I said in the beginning of this module, this chapter, I'm ending this one just because I know we're going to talk more in depth in the intermediate and advanced lessons of the sixth sense. So I don't want to overwhelm you at this point, but I wanted to do this chapter as Napoleon Hill has stated in the book. Now, the chapter ends with an introduction into the last chapter. And he writes several paragraphs on the topic of faith versus fear. Now remember, with faith and fear, remember what Napoleon Hill says. Faith and fear are poor bedfellows. With one exist, the other cannot. One must dominate over another. Faith and fear are poor bedfellows. Where one is, where one exists, the other cannot exist. Because one must dominate at all times. And we know this to be true as if we observe ourselves, that if we're scared, that fear is dominating. If we truly believe, that belief is dominating. And he goes on, and he says, talking about the next module, the next chapter, remember too, as you analyze the 6 ghosts of fear, that they are nothing but ghosts because they exist only in your mind. Remember, fear exists only in your mind. And I'll see you in the last chapter